Claire and Mia Fontaine's best-selling 2006 memoir called Comeback, A Mother and Daughter's Journey Through Hell and Back is about, well, their journey through hell and back. As a teen, Mia became addicted to drugs and ran away from home. Her mother, Claire, went through a desperate and ultimately successful attempt to save her. Then, a decade later, Mia's 25, and the two women faced a different but defining moment in their relationship. They decided to take a trip through 20 cities and 12 countries. They've jointly written a memoir about their travels and their relationship. It's called Have Mother, Will Travel. Claire and Mia Fontaine join me in the studio. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you.
Mia, start by giving us an overview of your first book, Comeback, because it kind of sets the stage for this new book.
Yeah. So I'll start at the beginning of the book. Basically, one of the subjects dealt with in Comeback was child sexual abuse. We wrote it really in part to destigmatize it because I was molested by my biological father when I was a child. And even though my mother fought very hard for me, she protected me and we moved halfway across the country. By the time I was a teenager, everything resurfaced. And I went from being a straight A student at a private all-girls school to dropping out, running away, eventually ending up strung out on heroin, living in the back of a van. And it's a durable trauma that I think everybody really underestimates the long-term effects of. And so the book really chronicles how we went from being estranged with me living on the streets and doing drugs to finding our way back to each other and with me to myself. I was eventually put in a lockdown boot camp school, first in Eastern Europe.
Yes, this is in the Czech Republic. Okay. It's a treatment program.
It's a residential treatment facility. It was a mixture of boot camp and therapy. And it was extreme, but I was an extreme kid and needed an extreme solution. I'd escaped from the other places that my parents had put me in. And this was a lockdown program. We had therapy every day. The rules were strict. To this day, those kind of schools are very controversial. And I don't think that they work if you're just, a B student smoking pot. But if it's a life and death situation, it saved my life and helped me deal with a set of issues that so many women and men face as child, and then it follows you into adulthood as well.
Wasn't that place though eventually shut down?
It was
because of abuse.
Because of abuse allegations.
There was no abuse.
What happened was the program was controversial to begin with, and basically journalists that sensationalized the words of two kids created sort of a maelstrom in a sense.
Yeah.
And then it just brought everything down. And they are controversial, and I think it is easy to misinterpret things if you're just looking at it from an outside perspective. But it was...
But you recovered from your addiction.
Yeah.
You graduated from college.
Yes.
You wrote a book with your mother.
Yes.
Then what?
Then we each sort of went our separate ways. We saw each other for work because we spoke nationally about healing families and sexual abuse. But our whole relationship had become about work. And meanwhile, I had become a young adult, and I was, living in New York, working as a publicist at HarperCollins Publishers, and just trying to figure out adulthood.
Claire, you were a writer. You had always lived in L.A., and then suddenly you moved to Florida and bought a house.
Yes. I had not, with my ex-husband, her biological father. When she says parents, now she's referring to her stepdad.
My stepdad.
Although we've never used the word stepdad. He's like...
He's my dad. The other was...
And so I thought, I'm in my mid-40s, or, I was closer to 50. We need to own a home, and the market keeps going up and up and up. And he had a lot of clients in Florida. We had friends who had bought a home, an older home, and it was just the West Palm Beach was the hot area. I don't know if you remember that New Yorkers were buying homes there in this historic area on the water. And another reason, and this is something that comes out in the book, but it was it was kind of unconscious. When we had first submitted Comeback for publication, we gave it to an agent, and I didn't tell her this, that it was rejected by 56 publishers.
Wow.
E-
It's a
but
tough field.
by the promotion department, because the editors, this was considered the best nonfiction proposal of that year. It wasn't that the editors didn't want it; they wanted it. We had ultimately three different top editors fighting for the book. But the promotion and marketing, that's who really makes a lot of the decisions. They said the school's controversial; we can't sell the book. Well, Judith Regan, who knows that's controversy sells, she said, "Are you nuts? That's what makes." So the rest is history. It went on to become a national bestseller. 5-6 years later, we still get emails from around the world. The book has saved a lot of lives because of her courage in talking about what she does. But I thought, oh my God, 56 published. It hasn't been picked up yet. I lost my faith in myself as a writer, and I thought, let's buy a fixer-upper and fix and flip it. And,
She's not Martha Stewart.
Oh.
She does not like anything domestic.
No, I don't know what I was thinking.
Then you wanted to become.
And then you had started to see the house as a metaphor for your life.
Yes, it was, because all these things came together at once. I was becoming middle-aged. I was 50, and it really started with a question from Mia. One day we're on the phone, and she said, "So, Mom, where did you see yourself at 50?" And it hit me like a ton of bricks that, oh my God, I didn't see myself at 50. Here I had all this amazing personal growth that we went through with Comeback, which we take the readers through the process of transformation, and you can see all the seminars and the workshops and the coaching, and then I went on to coach other families. And I knew what vision was. I knew how important it was to live intentionally. I forgot to have a vision of my own life post-motherhood. My whole life was about motherhood. And now that I was no longer a mother, and the motherhood got prolonged because of the writing of the book, and we did a lot of national public speaking for a few years, I realized that I didn't really have a vision for my life, Act 2. And so that, on an unconscious basis, is probably a lot of what led me to, well, let's buy this house and do a fix and flip, and I'll sell real estate. And because writing is an unpredictable, I couldn't sell ice to an Eskimo.
The book we're discussing is called Have Mother Will Travel. A mother and daughter discover themselves, each other, and the world. Claire and Mia Fontaine are best-selling authors of the book Comeback. Claire, not to cut you off, but why did you decide that you wanted to take this trip? What was it about this trip that appealed to you?
Well, after she asked that question, I really began to think about that I need to look at my life. I'm not happy. My marriage was strained. We'd been in the house for a few years and had done no fixing or flipping, no nothing. I'd stopped writing. That's who I am. I'm a writer, and I hadn't written in a few years. And I didn't know who I was anymore. And it was that midlife crisis, and I went through menopause, and I just wanted to look. I need to leave my life to look at it. I need to step back. And we had never celebrated the success of Comeback. We hadn't had fun together in so many years. And so I was just reassessing my life, and I happened across, I'm standing in line at a cafe just a couple weeks after the phone call, and there's an article on this global scavenger hunt. It's The Amazing Race, basically, but without the cameras and the prize money. You do it to raise money for charity, but it's played exactly the same. It's crazy, it's around the world, and I thought, and it's almost a month long, and I thought, oh my God, this is what we'll do. Let's go on this trip together and celebrate together, and we'll have time to really think about our lives. Little did we know that you don't even have time to think. You don't have time to eat or sleep on this. It is like The Amazing Race, exactly.
And you called Mia and said, hey, let's go travel together.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then Mia, you just said, okay.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a given. And anytime I get offered a trip anywhere, I'll take it. I love to travel. And it was so unlike my mom. It was the first time that I'd really heard her engaged or lively or excited about anything. It was just so unlike her. So it was the combination of really sensing some part of her it just sounded different. It's not like her asking something that she normally does. So there was part of me sensing that she needed to do this, and I wanted to be there with her. And the fact that, it sounded amazing. But
how does it work, Claire? How does this worldwide scavenger hunt work?
Well, you all meet in San Francisco. You're in teams of 2, and it is like The Amazing Race. You're given, except you don't know where you're going from one country to another. It's a complete mystery.
So when you had arrived in San Francisco, you didn't know where you were going.
Well, the very
we knew
first leg we
China.
knew China only because we had to get a visa in advance, but we didn't know where in China. But after that, anywhere in the world. And so you get a scavenge book, and all of the different scavenges. There's more than you could possibly do because it's a matter of strategizing. You get different points based on difficulty. So, and a lot of them you have to solve a riddle first to figure out what it is that they want you to do. And you can one might be worth 250 points, but it might take you half a day. Or do you stay, we went to Beijing first, or do you stay in Beijing and do all these little scavenges?
The book we're discussing is called Have Mother Will Travel. Claire and Mia Fontaine are in the studio with me. Claire, when you were in Nepal, you said this: one of the ways of understanding the values of a nation is finding out what the mothers there are most afraid of. What does that mean?
Well, in this country, what mothers are most afraid of, that their kids won't get into the right schools, that their kids will personal failure. That's our big fear, is personal failure. You send them to science camp and music lessons and language lessons. You want them in the right. Even for instance, in New York City, they register their kids for preschool while they're pregnant because you want them in the right preschool. Because if they're in the right preschool, of course, in 18 years they'll get into the right college, right? Well, in Nepal, the fears are getting an education at all, malnutrition,
Survival.
Yeah. And so you really understand for what the problems of a nation are, what problems they're not willing to look at are usually what a mother fears most. And the one thing that is, of course, common is the safety and happiness of your children. It just looks different in different countries.
And Mia, you went to an orphanage in Nepal. Tell us about that.
That was amazing in the sense that the man that was the director there was so devoted to these kids because in Nepal they call them kate, which is like throwaways. Nobody wants them, and it means dirty or failure. And these are kids that, I mean, they're fighting in a garbage heap over scraps that dogs are trying to take. And these are kids that a lot of them either will go on to become child prostitutes if they haven't already. The police treat them poorly. People just ignore them. And he would take them in. And so in doing that, it made me appreciate what my mom did. Because when I was a teenager, I was a throwaway. I was the type of kid that, you would pass by on the street and think like, oh, how sad.
You would just give up on.
Yeah. And a lot of my friends, their parents did give up on them. So it made me really appreciate my mother in a completely different way. And it also, I always loved doing the work that I did with Comeback, where I would speak about my experience and talk to kids that were still going through that. But over the years, I had started to feel uncomfortable with the fact that I enjoyed it because everybody my age would talk about, oh, so what did you do this weekend? Oh, I was at a great party. And oh, I spoke at a conference about child sexual abuse. And, it made me feel like, well, this isn't what I should be doing with my 20s. And when I went there, I really realized that should and age, it's just silly. Like this is important.
I thought it was interesting, Mia, that during the trip you met a lot of people your own age, and you were struck by how different they are from Americans your own age. What's that difference?
I think a lot of it is just maturity. I mean, when you meet, and I didn't realize this, I never considered myself or my friends immature, but when you meet people your same age in other countries, they are just much more well-spoken. They're more responsible. They don't live in this prolonged adolescence that we do. And part of it is a lot of times they have more responsibility. Like they're already taking care of their parents financially, or just, they grow up at a younger age, some of them. So I found that really interesting because you assume that whatever your experience is, other people's are. And all this stuff, you read a lot about like the quarter life crisis, which is kind of laughable in some ways, but for the fact that so many people go through that.
But why is it? Why is there such a difference between Americans in their 20s and other cultures?
Well, part of it is how we were coddled way more than they were, I think. And my generation in particular, we didn't manage our own time. We were taken from class to class.
And play date to play. You didn't
Play
even
date to
make
play
your own
date.
play. We did growing up on Saturday morning. We said, bye, Mom, and we were home for lunch and home for dinner, but we determined who we learned to negotiate our own time. These kids, and I'm guilty of it, the boomer moms, we took our kid, they had play dates, and we filled their time. They didn't really learn to
also-
negotiate their own time.
And it's interesting too because I'm not religious. I didn't really grow up religious. I don't go to church or temple, but I did notice that in the countries where religion was more prominent, there was also this greater sense of it's not all about you, and that's something that you really see in maybe just Americans in general, but all of my friends are really concerned with, am I happy? Am I this? Am I that? I. And you don't think of that as bad because that's how everybody is. But then when I went, in Malaysia, for example, there's just much more of a sense of you in the context of your community. And I didn't see that as much growing up or living in New York or LA within my generation.
Claire and Mia Fontaine are best-selling authors. They're in the studio with me discussing their memoir called Have Mother Will Travel. A mother and daughter discover themselves, each other, and the world. Claire, you really opened up to Mia, sorry.
That's okay.
during this trip about your feelings and about things that you had regretted over the course of your life. Is that a good thing, do you think, between mothers and their daughters? And what age are they able to handle that?
Well, as adults, it's not really something you want to, I think, when there is children and developing, it's not relevant. You're kind of answering a question that hasn't been asked. But as Mia was in her 20s, she has her own questions about her future. And one of my biggest lessons on the trip, and I learned this will come back as well. If you want your daughter to be strong and healthy and happy, it doesn't matter what you say or do. It's all about who you are. You have to be that way yourself. And I also realize that no matter how old she is, I'm still a really big influence on her. And we approached our subject, mothers and adult daughters, both in a scholarly way. We researched a lot and we polled lots of women. We sent out surveys and we questioned women around the world. And no matter how old your daughter gets, you are still a profound influence on her. And you can't tell her what to do, but you can inspire her by who you are. And I found that the degree to which I was willing to be vulnerable and open and honest with her was the degree to which our relationship deepened. And I let her see who I really was, and that the decisions you make in your 20s do matter long term. And if I were to hide that regret, and if you can't new age that away, or you can't, when you get to be in your 50s, there are certain things you never will be able to do again. Boomers like to think that we can still always do it all, but you can't. I wanted to be a doctor. No way I can ever do that again. I'll never be young again. I won't have more children. And I didn't always do what I wanted. I wasn't authentic for so many years, and I don't want her to make that mistake, and to let her know that, you know what, if you've got regrets, feel them. It's okay. There were some things I was not okay with, and feel it and move past it, because otherwise you have a fake past and a fake present, and that's a prescription for a fake future. And that's how you regret-proof your life, and it starts at her age. I didn't do that.
Mia, how did you react to that, of getting to know that your mother had these regrets that you never knew about?
It was difficult. It was fascinating. It was surprising. Some of them, in a way, it helped our relationship because she was more relatable to me. I never wanted to talk to her about certain insecurities or fears about what I was doing with my life or my future, because I felt like it would result in a big lecture, or with her judging me, or she just seemed like she had it all together. And when I learned that the opposite was true, it suddenly made her feel a lot safer to talk to. And also,
which is what we have to do when our daughters are children. We have to seem like we've got it all together and we've got it all figured out, so that they feel safe. Isn't that right?
And I think that's appropriate. And I don't think you should, because then you're putting yourself first. A lot of mothers have this idea that they have to be their child's friend. And I didn't believe that.
She was not my friend growing up.
No,
No,
it's not a popularity
she was my
contest.
mother.
I was her mother.
And
but at a
was-
certain point, yes, you're still, that's one thing we also got clear on, is
Yeah,
that
there's
roles
always
still
roles.
apply. I'm still her mother, and I am entitled to a degree of respect from her that she doesn't have to necessarily give others, and she will get from me things that she won't get from anyone else. So the roles are there, but also it's important to role model for her as a woman. Apart from being a mother, as a woman, that it's okay to not always know, and to question, and to think about your decisions long term, and to have regrets, and to be honest, just to be emotionally honest.
That's what I think it made me take my future more seriously than I had been. Because there was this one time in particular when she just like literally sat down and started crying. Of course, I was like, what do I do? But it made me, it just drove home the fact that, you know, it's hard to hear, but in some ways, I don't want that to be me when I'm 50. There are things that I want to do differently. So it was eye-opening, and watching her grow helped me grow up.
I'm going to ask you both this question, starting with you, Claire. What was the most important thing you learned during the scavenger hunt?
To live intentionally, and to have an intentional mother-daughter relationship. Have a relationship by design, not by default. If you want something, create it. If you have something you like, create more of it. Be intentional in all of your relationships, but especially with your daughter. Clean up things that aren't working. Create joy together, and make time for it, and also live intentionally. When you wake up every morning, what am I about today? Who do I want to be? What do I want my life to be? Is this choice I'm about to make serving me? You know, that's live intentionally and have relationships that are intentional.
What about you, Mia?
I would, from the scavenger hunt, I would have to say that it was just a sense of social responsibility. I mean, that was really eye-opening for me, hearing, you know, the experiences of other 20-somethings and realizing that it's okay to speak out about things in society that you don't like, even if it's uncool. You know, a lot of people, especially younger generations, I think things like how sexualized our culture is, or, you know, anything where the media, there's a lot of things that, you know, that I disagree with because I don't think it's good for children to grow up in, but you're hesitant to say that. And I just noticed that there was more a sense in other parts of the world of people wanting to create a certain set of values in their community. And I want to translate that back home.
Claire, you say this, you said, quote, "For every mother, there is the possibility of 3 in your relationship with your daughter. You, your daughter the way she is, and your daughter the way you want her to be."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. And that's one of the most important things, I think, in creating a strong bond with your daughter as an adult daughter, is to let go of your expectation of who she should be. Not to say that you can't speak your opinion, but learn to be with your daughter where she is now and be curious. Be neutral. So learn to listen for her experience.
It's hard for mothers
Yeah.
not to be constantly giving advice to our daughters because, frankly, we do know better.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Right.
We do. That's true. And after you've listened, and one of the things I've learned is say, okay, do you want me to just listen, or do you want to hear, you know, my counsel, what I would do? And if they know that you really hear them, they will ask then. They won't push you. You're just trying to control. Once they get that you really listen for their experience and you respect who they are, they're far more likely to then say, well, what would you do? Because they feel heard. Then they want to hear you. And yes, there are times that I will say things to her that no one else would have the right to. And I will say if I have a fear about something. And they do the same to us. They're just as judgmental, or they're just as, it's not called a lecture when a daughter does it.
It's our opinion.
Yes, yes.
And Claire, what's your relationship with your mother?
Well, now it was heartbreaking during the time we're on this trip and the writing of the book, for part of it. My mother and I weren't speaking for like 2 years, and that was a first. It was
Why?
so painful. It was a collection of things. she's from Eastern Europe, very different background. I'm American, and it was a collection of hurts and resentments. Also, something that I wrote on a blog post that in a million years I didn't think she would see. I still don't know. My mother has never touched a computer in her life. I wrote about what it was like to be raised by a mother from another culture where they didn't tell their kids, I love you, and she wasn't very demonstrative. And as a child, I took that to mean my mother doesn't love me. And there are a lot of women that feel that way. And I was communicating in this blog post to a lot of other women and getting feedback. And not that I didn't think, I knew my mother loved me, but as a child, I was always afraid. And my mother took that to mean you were a bad mother. And you know what? I can understand that. I can understand that. And I wish I hadn't posted that. That's another thing that I regret. But she wouldn't listen to me. She just never didn't speak to me again. But we have mended. I just kept. I got a firm scolding from my French friend, which is in the second half of the book, which takes place in France. The whole part 2 was that you have to keep trying. If something happens to your mother, you'll always regret it. And I did. So I started calling her, even if it was just say, I love you, before she hung up. And I did it for weeks. I would just keep calling, saying, Mommy, please, I love you. Can we get? And she would hang up. And eventually she would listen a little more. And now she gets angry if I don't call her.
So after all these experiences, this amazing trip you took together, what are you doing differently? Mia, I'll start with you. Now that you're back home, what's different about your life?
Well, professionally speaking, I grew up. I started taking things seriously in terms of, it sounds strange thinking of retirement, but yeah, I opened up a 401k, an IRA or IRA. I never know how they're pronounced. So and really considering, what do I want my life to look like 10 years when I'm my mom's age, 2 years from now, just what do I want for myself? What quality of life do I want to create? So just consciously considering my future. And I think in terms of our relationship, we really kept, where the book ends, we kept going. So I would say we're closer now than we've ever been, really.
And what about you, Claire?
Oh, yeah. Oh, we're definitely closer. I'm much more comfortable calling her to say, I'm struggling with something right now. Can you listen and let me know what your thoughts are? I also learned how to be a good daughter from my daughter. I learned that I did not give my mother the same degree of respect and non-judgment and acceptance that she gives me. And so that was another lesson. And the other was I became much more intentional. One thing not in the book is I got a call from my GYN about 2 weeks before. All the way in France, your GYN calls you to come home because they thought I had uterine cancer. And, when they call you on the other end of the world, it was scary. And I came back, and a nurse misread the results, and for a period of a month, I was told that I had 3 to 6 months to live. No operation would help. I got even more intentional. Thank God it turned out that it was not true. I was fine. But let me tell you, between the trip and being inspired by my daughter and finding out that I now was going to live, I changed my life entirely.
Claire and Mia Fontaine are best-selling authors. The book is Have Mother Will Travel. A mother and daughter discover themselves, each other, and the world. It's published by HarperCollins. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.